Lady Margaret Thornfield adjusted her silk gloves nervously as she walked through the marble corridors of Ravenshollow Palace. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the ornate carpet that had witnessed centuries of royal footsteps. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the unusual silence that seemed to hang in the air, or the way the servants avoided making eye contact as they hurried past with their duties. Margaret had served as the personal aide to Queen Isabella Whitmore for nearly 15 years, ever since the Queen's coronation. In all that time, she had never seen Her Majesty appear as troubled as she had been these past few weeks. The Queen's usually bright demeanor had grown distant, and she spent long hours locked away in her private study, emerging only for the most essential royal duties. The Kingdom of Aldermore had always prided itself on its stability and the unwavering moral character of its royal family. King Edmund Whitmore and Queen Isabella were beloved by their people, known for their charitable works and dedication to the realm. Their twin children, Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria, were the pride of the nation, representing the future of the monarchy with grace and intelligence. As Margaret approached the Queen's private chambers, she noticed Detective Inspector James Crawford waiting in the antechamber. His presence at the palace was highly unusual, as he typically handled only the most serious criminal investigations in the capital city of Thornwick. The inspector was a man in his early 40s, with graying temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His reputation for solving complex cases had earned him respect throughout the kingdom, but seeing him here filled Margaret with unease. "Good morning, Inspector Crawford," Margaret said, offering a polite curtsy. "I wasn't aware you had business at the palace today." Inspector Crawford turned to face her, his expression grave. "Lady Thornfield, I'm afraid I'm here on rather urgent matters. I've requested an audience with Her Majesty regarding some irregularities that have come to our attention." Before Margaret could inquire further, the heavy oak doors to the Queen's chambers opened, and Queen Isabella emerged. At 52, she remained strikingly beautiful, with auburn hair that caught the light and emerald eyes that had once sparkled with warmth but now seemed clouded with worry. She wore a deep blue gown adorned with the royal crest, and around her neck hung a magnificent sapphire necklace that had belonged to Queens of Aldermore for over 3 centuries. "Inspector Crawford," the Queen said, her voice carefully controlled. "I understand you wish to speak with me privately." "Yes, Your Majesty. Perhaps we might speak in your study?" "The matter is of a sensitive nature." Margaret watched as the Queen nodded and led the inspector into her private study. As the doors closed behind them, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold within the palace walls. Inside the study, Queen Isabella gestured for Inspector Crawford to take a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned near the fireplace. The room was filled with personal mementos and family portraits, creating an intimate atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the formal grandeur of the rest of the palace. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, many of them rare first editions that had been collected by generations of Aldermore royalty. "Inspector, I must say your request for this meeting came as quite a surprise," the Queen began, settling into her own chair. "What brings you to the palace on such urgent business?" Crawford cleared his throat and opened a leather portfolio he had been carrying. "Your Majesty, over the past several weeks, we've been investigating a series of thefts involving precious artifacts and jewels from various noble estates throughout the kingdom. The thefts appear to be highly sophisticated, with the perpetrator demonstrating intimate knowledge of security systems and the specific location of valuable items." The Queen's expression remained carefully neutral, though her hands tightened slightly on the armrests of her chair. "That is indeed troubling news, Inspector. I hope you're making progress in your investigation." "We are, Your Majesty. However, what brings me here today is a rather unexpected development." Crawford withdrew a photograph from his portfolio and placed it on the small table between them. "This was taken 3 nights ago at Thornwick International Airport by our surveillance team." Queen Isabella leaned forward to examine the photograph, and the color drained from her face. The image showed a figure in a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat walking through the airport's private terminal. Though the person's face was partially obscured, the distinctive sapphire necklace visible beneath the coat was unmistakable. "Inspector, I'm not sure what you're implying," the Queen said quietly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Your Majesty, that necklace you're wearing right now appears to be identical to the one shown in this photograph." The person wearing it was observed passing through airport security, with several cases that our sources indicate contained items matching the description of goods stolen from Lord Pemberton's estate just 2 days prior. The silence in the room was deafening. Queen Isabella stared at the photograph for a long moment before looking up at Inspector Crawford. "Inspector, are you suggesting that I am somehow involved in these thefts?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Majesty. I'm simply following the evidence where it leads. This necklace is quite distinctive, and, according to royal records, only one exists. It has been in the possession of Aldermore's queens for over 300 years. Queen Isabella stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where gardeners were tending to the rose bushes that had been her late mother-in-law's pride and joy. "Inspector Crawford, that necklace has indeed been in my family for generations. However, I can assure you that I was not at the airport 3 nights ago. I attended a state dinner that evening, which was documented by palace photographers and attended by over 200 guests. I'm aware of your alibi, Your Majesty," which raises even more troubling questions. The Queen turned back to face him, her composure beginning to crack slightly. "What do you mean? If you were not the person in this photograph, then someone else was wearing a necklace that, by all accounts, should be unique. Either there are multiple copies of this priceless artifact, or—" Crawford paused, allowing the implication to hang in the air. "Or someone has been creating forgeries," the Queen finished quietly. "That would be one explanation. However, there's another possibility we must consider. The items recovered from the airport security checkpoint included not just stolen goods, but also what appeared to be authentic royal artifacts. Pieces that, according to our research, should currently be housed in the royal treasury." Queen Isabella sank back into her chair, her face pale. "Inspector, I need you to understand the gravity of what you're suggesting. If word of this investigation were to reach the public, it could destroy the monarchy. The people of Aldermore have trusted my family for generations. I understand the implications, Your Majesty, which is why I came to you directly rather than pursuing other channels. However, I have a duty to investigate these crimes thoroughly, regardless of where the evidence leads." The Queen was quiet for several minutes, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Inspector, there are things about the royal treasury that are not widely known. Secrets that have been passed down from monarch to monarch for generations." "What kind of secrets, Your Majesty?" "The kind that could shake the very foundations of our kingdom if they were ever revealed." She stood and walked to a painting on the far wall depicting her late mother-in-law, Queen Margaret Whitmore. "My predecessor left behind certain arrangements that I inherited along with the crown. Arrangements that I've been struggling to understand and manage." Inspector Crawford leaned forward in his chair. "Your Majesty, if you have information that could help with this investigation, I urge you to share it. Withholding evidence, even for a member of the royal family, is a serious matter." Queen Isabella turned to face him, her emerald eyes now filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Inspector, what I'm about to tell you must remain strictly confidential until we can determine the full scope of what we're dealing with. 3 months ago, while conducting an inventory of the royal treasury in preparation for Prince Alexander's upcoming birthday celebrations, I discovered that several pieces were missing. Missing how? Gone. Vanished. Items that had been documented and cataloged for decades were simply no longer there. When I questioned the treasury guards and the palace staff, no one could explain their absence. The security systems showed no signs of breach, and the locks had not been tampered with." Crawford made notes in a small notebook he had produced. "How many pieces are we talking about, Your Majesty?" "Initially, I thought it was perhaps 5 or 6 items. Pieces that might have been moved or loaned for exhibitions and not properly documented. But, as I continued investigating, I realized the scope was much larger. Nearly 24 significant pieces are unaccounted for. And you didn't report this to the authorities?" Queen Isabella laughed bitterly. "Inspector, how does one report that the crown jewels have been systematically pilfered? The scandal would be enormous. And, without any evidence of how or when the thefts occurred, what purpose would it serve other than to destroy public confidence in the monarchy? So you began your own investigation." "Of sorts. I enlisted the help of a private security consultant, someone with expertise in art and jewel theft. His name is Marcus Blackwood, and he's been working discreetly to trace where these items might have gone." Crawford's pen stopped moving. "Marcus Blackwood? The former Scotland Yard detective who was dismissed for questionable methods." "The same. His reputation may be tarnished in official circles, but his results are undeniable. He's recovered stolen artwork for private clients throughout Europe. Your Majesty, Marcus Blackwood is currently wanted for questioning in connection with an international art theft ring. Using his services was inadvisable. Queen Isabella's face showed genuine shock. Wanted for questioning? Inspector, he came highly recommended by Lord Pemberton himself. The pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place in Crawford's mind. Lord Pemberton, whose estate had been robbed just days ago, had recommended the very man who might be behind the thefts. The Queen's missing treasury items, the mysterious figure at the airport wearing the royal necklace, and now the connection to Marcus Blackwood. Your Majesty, I believe you may have been deceived. It's possible that Mr. Blackwood has been using his access to the palace and knowledge of the royal treasury to orchestrate these thefts. The missing items from your treasury may very well be the same pieces that have been turning up at crime scenes throughout the kingdom. Queen Isabella stood abruptly and began pacing the length of the study. But that would mean he's been using me to facilitate his crimes, using the monarchy itself as cover for his operations. It would explain how someone could have detailed knowledge of security systems and the location of valuable items. If he had access to palace records and blueprints, he could have planned these thefts with precision. Inspector, if this is true, then I've been unknowingly complicit in crimes against my own people. The very nobles and citizens I've sworn to protect have been victimized because of my poor judgment. Crawford could see the weight of realization settling on the Queen's shoulders. Your Majesty, if you've been deceived, then you are as much a victim as anyone else. However, we need to act quickly to prevent further thefts and recover the stolen items. What do you propose? First, I need to know everything about your dealings with Marcus Blackwood. Every meeting, every piece of information you shared, every access you granted him to palace facilities. Second, we need to secure the remaining treasury items and conduct a full inventory to determine exactly what's missing. Queen Isabella nodded, though her hands were visibly shaking. Inspector, there's something else you should know. Marcus told me that some of the missing pieces might surface at international auction houses. He said he was monitoring various sales to see if our items appeared on the market. Did he provide you with any documentation of these auction house investigations? He gave me several catalogs and reports, yes. They're in my private safe. I'll need to examine those immediately. Your Majesty, I also need to ask about the necklace you're wearing. When did you last verify its authenticity? Queen Isabella's hand instinctively went to the sapphire necklace at her throat. I assumed it was authentic. It's been in my possession since my coronation 15 years ago. Given what we now suspect about Mr. Blackwood's activities, it's possible that he may have replaced authentic pieces with expertly crafted forgeries. The person at the airport might have been wearing the real necklace while you unknowingly wore a copy. The implications of this statement hit the Queen like a physical blow. If her own jewelry had been replaced with forgeries, then Blackwood's deception ran even deeper than they had imagined. Not only had he potentially stolen from other nobles using his access to the palace, but he may have been systematically replacing the royal treasury with fake pieces while selling the originals. Inspector, if what you're suggesting is true, then the very symbols of our monarchy may be fraudulent. The crown jewels that represent centuries of tradition and legitimacy could be worthless copies. We won't know for certain until we have the pieces examined by experts. However, I recommend that we proceed with extreme caution. If word of this situation were to leak before we have concrete evidence and a plan to address it, the consequences could be catastrophic. Queen Isabella sank into her chair once more, the weight of the crisis settling fully upon her. Inspector Crawford, I place myself and the monarchy in your hands. What must we do to resolve this situation with as little damage as possible to the crown and the kingdom? First, we need to locate Marcus Blackwood and bring him in for questioning. Second, we need to conduct a thorough forensic examination of the royal treasury. Third, we need to trace the stolen items and attempt to recover them before they disappear permanently into private collections or international markets. And the investigation must remain absolutely confidential. For now, yes. However, Your Majesty, I must warn you that if evidence emerges of crimes committed using royal resources or authority, there may come a point where the investigation cannot remain hidden. Queen Isabella nodded gravely. I understand, Inspector. The integrity of the law must be maintained, even if it means personal consequences for me or my family. As Inspector Crawford prepared to leave the Queen's study, both of them were acutely aware that they stood at the beginning of a crisis that could forever change the kingdom of Aldermore. The theft of a few precious items had evolved into a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of the monarchy. Outside the study doors, Lady Margaret Thornfield continued with her daily duties, unaware that the conversation taking place mere feet away would soon transform the palace into the center of one of the most significant criminal investigations in the kingdom's history. The morning sunlight that had seemed so bright and hopeful just hours earlier now felt ominous, casting shadows that seemed to hide secrets in every corner of the ancient palace. The game of deception had begun, and the stakes could not have been higher. The crown itself hung in the balance, and only time would tell whether the truth, when finally revealed, would restore faith in the monarchy or destroy it forever. The royal treasury vault lay 3 levels beneath Raven's Hollow Palace, accessible only through a series of increasingly secure passages that had been carved from solid stone centuries ago. Inspector Crawford followed Queen Isabella and the head treasury guard, Captain William Hayes, through the narrow corridors lit by modern LED fixtures that cast harsh shadows on the ancient walls. The weight of the palace above seemed to press down upon them as they descended deeper into the heart of the royal stronghold. Captain Hayes, a man in his 60s who had served the royal family for over 30 years, walked with the measured gait of someone who had made this journey thousands of times. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who took his responsibilities seriously, and his keys jingled softly with each step. Despite his long service, Crawford could see tension in the captain's shoulders as they approached the vault. Even he seemed to understand that today's inspection would be unlike any other. The main treasury vault hasn't been opened for a full inventory in over 5 years, Captain Hayes explained as they reached the final security checkpoint. Her Majesty's recent concerns prompted us to begin preparations for a complete catalog, but the process is quite extensive given the number of pieces housed here. Queen Isabella remained silent, her face pale in the artificial light. She had spent the previous evening in her study with Inspector Crawford, going through every detail of her interactions with Marcus Blackwood. The picture that had emerged was deeply troubling. Blackwood had not only gained access to detailed information about the royal treasury, but had also been present during several private viewings of specific pieces, always claiming he needed to examine them closely to aid in his search for the missing items. The final vault door was a masterpiece of both ancient craftsmanship and modern technology. The original iron and steel construction, dating back to the 15th century, had been reinforced with contemporary security systems including biometric scanners, motion detectors, and pressure-sensitive floors. Captain Hayes placed his hand on the scanner while Queen Isabella provided her royal access code. The massive door slowly swung open with a deep mechanical hum. The treasury chamber was vast, far larger than Inspector Crawford had expected. Row upon row of climate-controlled cases lined the walls, each containing artifacts, jewelry, crowns, scepters, and precious objects that represented centuries of royal history. The lighting system automatically activated as they entered, revealing the full scope of the collection. Even knowing that some pieces were missing, the sight was breathtaking. The most valuable pieces are housed in this central section, Captain Hayes said, leading them to a series of individual display cases in the center of the chamber. These include the coronation crown, the royal scepter, and the most significant jewelry pieces worn by generations of queens. Crawford approached the first case and immediately noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The coronation crown, sitting regally on its velvet cushion, appeared magnificent at first glance. However, under the bright lights, he could see subtle differences in the way the precious stones caught and reflected the light. Having worked with jewelry experts on previous cases, he had developed an eye for the telltale signs of superior forgeries. Captain Hayes, when was this crown last worn? Crawford asked, pulling out a magnifying glass from his investigation kit. At Her Majesty's coronation 15 years ago, and once more at the 10th anniversary celebration 5 years past, Hayes replied. It's only removed from the case for official ceremonies and periodic maintenance. Crawford examined the crown more closely, focusing on the largest sapphire at its center. The stone was beautiful, but, under magnification, he could see tiny imperfections that suggested it might be a synthetic creation rather than the natural stone that should have been there. Natural sapphires of that age and quality typically contain specific inclusions and characteristics that this stone lacked. Your Majesty, I'm going to need to have this piece examined by a gemologist, Crawford said, straightening up. Preferably someone with expertise in historical pieces. Queen Isabella nodded, though Crawford could see the fear in her eyes. Whatever you need to do, Inspector. We must know the truth. They moved systematically through the treasury, examining piece after piece. The pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. Approximately one-third of the most valuable items showed signs of being potential forgeries. The craftsmanship was excellent, good enough to fool casual observation, but sophisticated examination revealed the deception. Even more troubling, the pieces that appeared to be authentic were primarily those that were rarely handled or displayed, suggesting that the forger had prioritized replacing items that would be seen or photographed regularly. Captain Hayes grew increasingly agitated as the inspection continued. "This is impossible," he muttered, staring at a tiara that had clearly been replaced with a copy. "I personally handle these pieces during maintenance. I should have noticed differences in weight, in the feel of the metal." "The forgeries are exceptionally well done," Crawford said, trying to reassure the distraught captain. Whoever created these had access to detailed photographs and measurements of the originals. They may have even used similar metals and synthetic stones that closely matched the original's properties. As they continued their examination, Crawford's phone buzzed with an urgent message. It was from Detective Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, his second-in-command on the investigation. The message was brief, but alarming. "Blackwood spotted at Thornwick Gallery District. Moving to apprehend. Backup requested. Your Majesty, I need to step out for a moment," Crawford said, showing her the message. "My team may have located Marcus Blackwood. Go," Queen Isabella said immediately. "Captain Hayes, and I will continue the inventory. If what we're discovering here is true, then apprehending Blackwood is our highest priority." Crawford hurried through the palace corridors and out to his vehicle, his mind racing with the implications of what they had found. If their suspicions were correct, Marcus Blackwood had perpetrated one of the most audacious thefts in criminal history, systematically replacing royal treasures with forgeries while using his position as a consultant to avoid suspicion. The sophistication required suggested this was not a one-man operation, but rather an organized effort with significant resources and expertise. The Thornwick Gallery District was a 20-minute drive from the palace, located in the historic heart of the capital city. The area was known for its high-end art dealers, auction houses, and private galleries that catered to wealthy collectors. If Blackwood was operating in this area, it suggested he might be in the process of selling stolen pieces or meeting with potential buyers. Crawford's radio crackled to life as he navigated through the city traffic. "Inspector, this is Mitchell. We have Blackwood in sight at Pemberton Fine Arts Gallery. He appears to be carrying a briefcase and is accompanied by two other individuals we haven't identified. Do not approach until I arrive," Crawford ordered. "We need to coordinate this carefully. If he's meeting with buyers, we want to gather as much evidence as possible before making arrests." When Crawford arrived at the gallery district, he could see Detective Sergeant Mitchell positioned across the street from Pemberton Fine Arts. The gallery itself was an elegant establishment with large windows displaying carefully curated pieces. Through the windows, Crawford could see several figures in conversation near the back of the gallery. "What's the situation?" Crawford asked as he joined Mitchell behind a parked van that provided good cover for observation. "Blackwood arrived about 20 minutes ago with a briefcase and a larger carrying case," Mitchell reported. "He met with gallery owner Thomas Pemberton and another man we haven't identified yet. They've been examining items from both cases, using magnifying equipment and what appears to be some kind of testing device." Crawford pulled out binoculars and focused on the scene inside the gallery. Marcus Blackwood was exactly as described in his file, a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothing. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in such refined surroundings. The other man appeared to be younger, perhaps in his 40s, and was dressed in the style of an international businessman. The unidentified man arrived in a vehicle with diplomatic plates, Mitchell added. Embassy designation suggests he might be representing foreign interests. This development made the situation even more complex. If Blackwood was selling royal artifacts to foreign buyers, it could create international incidents beyond the domestic criminal charges. The theft of a nation's royal treasures and their sale to foreign powers had historical precedents that had led to diplomatic crises. Inside the gallery, Crawford watched as Blackwood opened his briefcase and carefully removed what appeared to be a small crown or tiara wrapped in protective cloth. Even from their distance, the piece sparkled brilliantly under the gallery lights. Thomas Pemberton examined it with a jeweler's loupe while the unidentified man took photographs with a high-resolution camera. "We need to move soon," Crawford decided. "If they complete this transaction, Those pieces could disappear into private collections or foreign countries where recovery would be extremely difficult. Before Mitchell could respond, Crawford's phone rang. It was Queen Isabella. "Inspector, you need to return to the palace immediately," the Queen said, her voice tight with stress. "We found something in the treasury that changes everything." "Can it wait, Your Majesty? We're about to apprehend Blackwood." "Inspector, we found a hidden chamber behind the main vault. It contains documents that suggest this conspiracy goes back much further than we thought. Marcus Blackwood may not be the mastermind, but rather just one participant in a much larger operation." Crawford felt his investigation shifting beneath his feet. How much further back? The documents are dated over a year ago, and they reference previous thefts and replacements that we never discovered. "Inspector, I fear we may have found evidence of a long-term systematic looting of not just our treasury, but possibly other royal and noble collections throughout Europe." The implications hit Crawford like a physical blow. If Queen Isabella was correct, they weren't dealing with a simple theft ring, but an international conspiracy that had been operating for years, possibly decades. The thefts from noble estates throughout the kingdom might not be recent crimes, but rather the exposure of an operation that had been hidden for years. "Your Majesty, I'll return to the palace as soon as we complete this arrest. The evidence we gather from Blackwood may be crucial to understanding the full scope of what we're dealing with." Crawford ended the call and turned back to Mitchell. "We're moving in now. I want Blackwood and both of his associates taken into custody. Make sure the gallery is secured and all items on the premises are cataloged as evidence." As they approached the gallery, Crawford could see through the windows that the transaction was nearing completion. Money had appeared on the table, and the unidentified man was carefully placing the crown-like piece into a specialized carrying case. If they waited any longer, crucial evidence would be lost. Crawford and his team entered the gallery with their credentials displayed, causing immediate panic among the three men inside. Blackwood's composed demeanor cracked for the first time, revealing the calculating criminal beneath the polished exterior. "Marcus Blackwood, you are under arrest for theft, conspiracy, and handling stolen goods," Crawford announced as his officers moved to secure the area. "The items in your possession are evidence in an ongoing investigation." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Blackwood replied, though his eyes darted nervously toward the cases containing the artifacts. "I'm simply facilitating the sale of some privately owned pieces." Thomas Pemberton stepped forward, his face pale. "Inspector, I can assure you that my gallery operates within all legal requirements. Any items sold here come with proper provenance documentation." Crawford examined the paperwork that Pemberton produced, noting immediately that the documents were sophisticated forgeries. The letterhead and signatures appeared authentic, but the paper itself was too new, and certain security features that should have been present were missing. "Mr. Pemberton, these provenance documents are fraudulent. The items being sold here are stolen property belonging to the Crown of Aldermore." The unidentified man with the diplomatic plates had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he spoke in accented English. "I believe there has been some misunderstanding. I am here as a representative of private collectors who are interested in acquiring pieces for legitimate historical preservation." "And your name is?" Crawford asked. "Dr. Victor Kozlov. I represent certain institutions interested in preserving European royal artifacts." Crawford made note of the name while his team secured the evidence. The items in Blackwood's cases included not only the crown he had observed being examined, but also several other pieces that appeared to match descriptions of items missing from various noble estates. Each piece was photographed and carefully documented before being secured as evidence. As Blackwood was led away in handcuffs, he finally spoke. "Inspector, you have no idea what you're interfering with. This operation involves people far more powerful than you realize." "Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwood?" "It's a warning. The items you think you're protecting were never truly owned by the people who claim them. There are historical debts and claims that go back centuries." Crawford found this statement intriguing, but chose not to pursue it further until he could return to the palace and examine the documents Queen Isabella had discovered. However, Blackwood's words suggested that the conspiracy might involve not just theft, but complex historical and legal claims about the ownership of royal treasures. The drive back to Ravenshollow Palace gave Crawford time to process the day's developments. What had begun as an investigation into a series of thefts had evolved into something far more complex and potentially more dangerous. The discovery of the hidden chamber and the documents it contained might provide crucial insights into the true scope and nature of the conspiracy. As he approached the palace gates, Crawford could see increased security presence and realized that word of the investigation was beginning to spread despite their efforts to maintain secrecy. The stakes were rising with each new discovery, and he had a growing sense that they were still only seeing the surface of a much deeper and more dangerous conspiracy. Queen Isabella met him at the palace entrance, her face showing the strain of the day's revelations. "Inspector, what we found changes everything we thought we knew about this case. The hidden chamber contains not just documents, but also photographs and detailed records of transactions going back over 20 years. 20 years, Crawford said, feeling the magnitude of the investigation expanding once again. "Inspector, I fear we may have uncovered evidence of the systematic looting of royal collections across multiple kingdoms, all coordinated through what appears to be an international network of dealers, forgers, and corrupt officials." As they walked toward the treasury, Crawford realized that their investigation had evolved from a domestic criminal matter into something that could have international implications. The arrest of Blackwood was just the beginning, and the real challenge lay in unraveling a conspiracy that appeared to span decades and multiple countries. The shadows of Raven's Hollow Palace seemed deeper now, hiding secrets that had been carefully guarded for years. The truth, when fully revealed, would either restore faith in the institutions they represented or shatter them forever. The hidden chamber behind the royal treasury was smaller than Crawford had expected, but its contents were overwhelming. Dozens of filing cabinets lined the walls, filled with documents, photographs, and detailed records that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning 2 decades. Queen Isabella stood beside a large table where Captain Hayes had arranged some of the most significant documents they had discovered. "Inspector, this appears to be a master list of items targeted for theft or replacement," Captain Hayes said, pointing to a leather-bound ledger. "It includes not only pieces from our treasury, but items from royal and noble collections across Europe. Each entry includes detailed photographs, measurements, and what appears to be market valuations." Crawford examined the ledger, noting the meticulous organization and professional presentation. This was not the work of common criminals, but rather a sophisticated operation with significant resources and international reach. The entries were organized by country and collection, with status updates indicating whether items had been successfully acquired, replaced with forgeries, or were still being pursued. "The most disturbing aspect," Queen Isabella said, her voice trembling slightly, "is that some of these documents bear official seals and signatures. It appears that certain government officials and institutional representatives may have been complicit in facilitating these thefts." Crawford looked more closely at the documents Queen Isabella indicated. Several bore the seals of various European cultural ministries and export licensing authorities. If authentic, these documents suggested that stolen artifacts were being legitimized through corrupt official channels, making their recovery and prosecution far more complex. "Your Majesty, we need to contact Interpol immediately," Crawford said. "If this operation truly spans multiple countries, we'll need international cooperation to investigate and prosecute those involved." As they continued examining the documents, Lady Margaret Thornfield appeared at the chamber entrance. Her usually composed demeanor showed signs of stress as she approached Queen Isabella with an urgent message. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but Prince Alexander has returned from his university studies earlier than expected. He's asking to speak with you immediately about some rumors he's heard concerning palace security." Queen Isabella's face paled. The investigation had been conducted with extreme discretion, but news of increased police presence and the arrest of Marcus Blackwood was apparently beginning to circulate. The involvement of the royal children in this crisis would only complicate an already delicate situation. "Tell Prince Alexander that I will meet with him shortly," the Queen said. "Inspector, how much can I reveal to my children about this investigation? For now, I would recommend keeping the details to a minimum. If word spreads about the extent of the thefts, it could compromise our ability to recover stolen items and apprehend other participants in the conspiracy." Crawford's phone buzzed with another message from Detective Sergeant Mitchell. Marcus Blackwood had been formally charged and was being held in the high-security detention facility in Thornwick. However, the message also indicated that Blackwood was requesting to speak with Crawford about making a deal for information. "Your Majesty, Blackwood wants to negotiate." He claims to have information about the conspiracy that could lead to the recovery of stolen items and the identification of other participants. Do you trust him? I don't trust him at all. However, given the scope of what we've discovered, his information might be crucial to understanding the full extent of the operation. Queen Isabella considered this carefully. Inspector, if speaking with Blackwood could help us recover stolen items and protect other potential victims, then I believe you should hear what he has to say. However, I want to be present during any negotiations. Your Majesty, that's highly irregular. Criminal negotiations typically don't include the victims of the crimes. Inspector, this is not a typical criminal case. The stability of the monarchy and potentially multiple royal institutions across Europe may be at stake. I need to hear firsthand what Blackwood has to say. Crawford recognized the wisdom in the Queen's request, despite the procedural irregularities it would create. The political and diplomatic implications of this case were unprecedented, and traditional investigative protocols might need to be adapted to address the unique circumstances. Very well, Your Majesty. I'll arrange for the interview to take place at a secure location where your presence can be accommodated. Before leaving for the detention facility, Crawford and Queen Isabella agreed on several immediate priorities. First, the remaining treasury items would be secured and examined by independent experts to determine which were authentic and which were forgeries. Second, the international scope of the conspiracy required immediate notification of law enforcement agencies in other affected countries. Third, they needed to develop a strategy for managing public revelation of the investigation while minimizing damage to the monarchy's reputation. The secure interview room at the Thornwick detention facility was stark and professional, designed for serious criminal interrogations. Marcus Blackwood sat across from Crawford and Queen Isabella, his elegant clothing replaced with standard detention garb. Despite his circumstances, he maintained an air of confidence that suggested he believed his information gave him significant leverage. Your Majesty, Blackwood began with a slight bow of his head. I want to express my regret that our association has led to this unfortunate situation. Mr. Blackwood, Queen Isabella replied coldly. You deceived me and used my trust to facilitate crimes against my people. Your regret is meaningless unless you're prepared to help undo the damage you've caused. That's precisely why I requested this meeting. Inspector Crawford, the operation you've uncovered is far larger and more complex than you realize. I was merely a middle-level participant in a network that has been operating across Europe for over 2 decades. Crawford activated a recording device and formally began the interview. Mr. Blackwood, you've been charged with multiple felonies including theft, conspiracy, and fraud. Before we discuss any potential cooperation, you need to understand that anything you say can be used in your prosecution. I understand completely. However, what I'm offering in exchange for consideration in my sentencing is information that could lead to the recovery of hundreds of stolen artifacts and the dismantling of an international criminal network. Hundreds, Queen Isabella said, her voice showing shock. Your Majesty, the royal treasury of Aldermore was just one target among many. Over the past 20 years, similar operations have been conducted against royal collections in Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, and several German principalities. The total value of stolen items exceeds 50 million euros. Crawford leaned forward, his interest piqued by the scope Blackwood was describing. Who organized this network? The operation was coordinated by a man named Professor Heinrich Weber, an art historian who initially worked as a legitimate consultant for various museums and royal institutions. Over time, he realized that his access to detailed information about royal collections could be monetized through systematic theft and forgery. Where is Professor Weber now? That's where the situation becomes more complex. Weber has been operating under the protection of certain government officials who have been receiving percentages of the profits from sales of stolen artifacts. He's currently believed to be in Switzerland, but he has safe havens arranged in several countries. Queen Isabella leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. You're suggesting that government officials have been actively participating in the theft of royal treasures? Not just participating, Your Majesty. In some cases, they've been facilitating the operations by providing official documentation that legitimizes the sale of stolen pieces. The documents you found in the hidden chamber represent just a fraction of the official corruption involved. Crawford made detailed notes while considering the international legal complications this information would create. Mr. Blackwood, what specifically can you offer to help recover stolen items? I can provide detailed records of where specific pieces have been sold, including the identities of buyers and the locations where items are currently housed. I can also provide information about planned future thefts that could be prevented with proper advance warning. Future thefts. The network has identified targets in Italy and Spain that are scheduled for operations within the next 6 months. With proper coordination with law enforcement in those countries, these thefts could be prevented. Queen Isabella spoke quietly, her voice filled with determination. Mr. Blackwood, if you provide this information and it leads to the recovery of stolen items and the prevention of future thefts, what consideration are you seeking? I'm hoping for a reduced sentence and the possibility of serving my time in a minimum security facility. I understand that I will face consequences for my actions, but I want to help minimize the damage done to the institutions I helped violate. Crawford considered the offer carefully. The information Blackwood was providing could indeed lead to a major breakthrough in international art crime, but they needed verification before any deals could be finalized. Mr. Blackwood, I need you to provide specific details that can be immediately verified. Give us information about one stolen piece that we can confirm and recover as a demonstration of your cooperation. Blackwood thought for a moment before responding. 3 weeks ago, a sapphire brooch belonging to the Duchess of Marlborough was sold to a private collector in Paris. The buyer's name is Jean-Claude Dubois, and the piece is currently housed in his apartment on the Rue Saint-Honoré. The sale price was €28,000, and the transaction was facilitated through Pemberton Fine Arts Gallery. Crawford made note of these details and immediately sent a message to his team requesting verification through international channels. If Blackwood's information proved accurate, it would validate his claims about having detailed knowledge of the network's operations. Inspector, there's something else you should know, Blackwood continued. The network has been monitoring law enforcement interest in their activities. They're aware that investigations have begun, and they're currently working to liquidate remaining inventory and destroy evidence. How much time do we have? Crawford asked urgently. Days, not weeks. Professor Weber has activated contingency plans that involve moving key participants to safe locations and disposing of evidence that could link them to specific thefts. Queen Isabella stood and walked to the small window in the interview room, looking out at the city of Thornwick. Inspector, if what Mr. Blackwood is telling us is true, then we're not just dealing with past crimes, but an active conspiracy that's currently working to escape justice. Your Majesty, I recommend that we immediately alert Interpol and coordinate with law enforcement agencies in all potentially affected countries. We need to act quickly if we're going to prevent the network from destroying evidence and escaping prosecution. Blackwood leaned forward across the table. Inspector, there's one more thing. Professor Weber has been maintaining detailed records of all operations, including photographs and documentation of every stolen piece. If you can locate and secure his archives, you'll have evidence of every theft committed over the past 20 years. Where are these archives located? Weber maintains 3 separate locations. One is in a bank vault in Zurich, another is in a private storage facility in Vienna, and the third is in a manor house he owns in the French countryside. The locations are known only to Weber and his most trusted associates. Crawford realized that they were facing a race against time. If the network was indeed liquidating and preparing to disappear, they needed to coordinate international law enforcement efforts immediately to prevent the destruction of evidence and the escape of key participants. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to have you work with our team to provide detailed information about the network structure, key participants, and known locations. In exchange, I'll recommend to the prosecutor that your cooperation be considered during sentencing. Queen Isabella turned back to face Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, you used my trust to facilitate crimes that have damaged institutions I'm sworn to protect. While I cannot forgive your actions, I hope your cooperation will help prevent others from suffering the same violations. As the interview concluded, Crawford felt the weight of responsibility for coordinating what would likely become one of the largest international art crime investigations in history. The information Blackwood had provided suggested that they were dealing with a criminal network that had operated with impunity for 2 decades, protected by corruption and enabled by the international nature of the art market. The drive back to Ravenshollow Palace gave Crawford time to plan the next phases of the investigation. International coordination would be essential, but it would also create complications as different countries had varying legal systems and priorities. The political implications of exposing government corruption in multiple countries could create diplomatic tensions that might complicate the investigation. When they arrived at the palace, Prince Alexander was waiting in the Queen's study. At 25, he bore a strong resemblance to his father, King Edmund, but his mother's emerald eyes reflected intelligence and determination that reminded Crawford of Queen Isabella herself. "Mother, what exactly is happening here?" Prince Alexander asked as soon as the Queen entered the study. "There are rumors circulating at university about police investigations and arrests connected to the palace." Queen Isabella looked at Crawford, who nodded slightly, indicating that some disclosure was now necessary given the circumstances. "Alexander, we've discovered that someone we trusted has been involved in stealing royal artifacts and replacing them with forgeries. Inspector Crawford is leading an investigation that appears to have international implications." Prince Alexander's face showed immediate concern. "How extensive are the thefts? Are we talking about minor pieces or significant artifacts?" "Significant artifacts," Crawford answered, "including pieces that represent centuries of royal history and tradition." "What does this mean for the monarchy? If word of this reaches the public before we can resolve the situation, it could undermine confidence in the institution itself." Queen Isabella appreciated her son's immediate grasp of the political implications. "That's why we're working to resolve this matter as quickly and discreetly as possible. However, the scope of the investigation may require us to make certain disclosures to protect other potential victims." Prince Alexander stood and walked to the window, much as his mother had done earlier. "Inspector Crawford, what can I do to help? The royal family needs to present a united front during this crisis." Crawford was impressed by the prince's mature response to the situation. "Your Highness, the most helpful thing you can do right now is to maintain normal public appearances while we work to apprehend the remaining participants in this conspiracy." As the day ended, Crawford reflected on how dramatically the investigation had evolved. What had begun as a simple theft case had revealed an international conspiracy that threatened royal institutions across Europe. The information provided by Marcus Blackwood, if verified, could lead to the recovery of hundreds of stolen artifacts and the dismantling of a criminal network that had operated for decades. However, Crawford also realized that they were now racing against time. Professor Weber and his associates were likely already implementing escape plans, and evidence was potentially being destroyed even as they planned their next moves. The success of the investigation would depend on their ability to coordinate international efforts while maintaining the secrecy necessary to prevent the network from completely disappearing. The shadows of evening fell across Ravenshollow Palace as Crawford prepared to contact Interpol and begin the complex process of international coordination. The stakes had never been higher, and the fate of royal institutions across Europe might depend on their ability to act swiftly and decisively in the coming days. Inspector Crawford stood in the Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France, surrounded by law enforcement officials from 8 different countries. The secure conference room was filled with tension as representatives from the United Kingdom, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, France, and Austria reviewed the evidence that had been gathered over the past week. The scope of Professor Heinrich Weber's criminal network had exceeded even their most pessimistic projections. Commissioner Elena Rossetti of Interpol addressed the assembled group. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're dealing with is the largest international art theft ring in modern history. The evidence provided by our colleagues from Aldermore has been verified through multiple sources, and we now have confirmation of thefts totaling over 75 million euros across 7 countries. Crawford felt a mixture of vindication and overwhelming responsibility as he listened to the commissioner's summary. The information Marcus Blackwood had provided had proven accurate in every detail they had been able to verify. The recovery of the Duchess of Marlborough's sapphire brooch from Jean-Claude Dubois had led to his arrest and cooperation, which in turn had provided evidence linking dozens of other stolen pieces to Professor Weber's network. Detective Inspector Klaus Müller from the German Federal Criminal Police Office leaned forward in his chair. "Inspector Crawford, what is the current status of Professor Weber himself? Our intelligence suggests he may have fled to a non-extradition country. We believe Weber is currently in Switzerland, but he maintains safe houses in several countries that don't have extradition treaties with affected nations. However, we've identified 3 associates who are still operating within reach of our jurisdictions." Commissioner Rossetti activated a large display screen showing photographs and profiles of the remaining suspects. "Dr. Viktor Kozlov, whom you apprehended during the gallery arrest, has provided extensive information about the network's operations in exchange for reduced charges. His cooperation has been particularly valuable in identifying buyers and tracking stolen pieces. Crawford reviewed his notes from the interrogation sessions with Kozlov. The Russian art expert had revealed that Weber's network operated like a sophisticated business, with specialized roles for reconnaissance, theft, forgery, documentation, and sales. The level of organization and international coordination required suggested backing from sources with significant financial resources. The most concerning aspect of this investigation, continued Commissioner Rossetti, is the evidence of government corruption. We have documented proof that officials in at least 4 countries provided fraudulent export licenses and authenticity certificates that legitimized the sale of stolen artifacts. Inspector Margot Dubois from the French National Police raised her hand. Commissioner, what is our strategy for addressing the political implications of these revelations? Some of the compromised officials hold senior positions that could create diplomatic complications. Crawford had been wrestling with this same question. The evidence against certain government officials was overwhelming, but prosecuting them could create international incidents that might interfere with the primary goal of recovering stolen artifacts and dismantling the criminal network. Our priority must be stopping the ongoing criminal activity and recovering stolen items, Crawford said. We can address the corruption charges once we've secured the evidence and arrested the primary conspirators. Commissioner Rossetti nodded in agreement. Inspector Crawford raises a valid point. However, we also need to consider that some of these officials may still be actively facilitating the network's escape efforts. We may need to act simultaneously against both the criminals and their corrupt official contacts. The meeting continued for several hours as representatives from each country provided updates on their domestic investigations. The picture that emerged was of a criminal enterprise that had operated with remarkable efficiency and sophistication, targeting the most valuable and historically significant pieces from royal and noble collections while avoiding detection for over 2 decades. Detective Inspector Lars Andersen from Denmark's National Police provided particularly disturbing information. Our investigation has revealed that Weber's network didn't just target existing collections. They also commissioned forgeries in advance, then arranged theft specifically to acquire pieces that matched their predetermined forgeries. This allowed them to replace stolen items with copies that were so accurate they went undetected for years. This revelation explained how the network had been able to operate for such an extended period without detection. By creating forgeries in advance and only stealing pieces that matched their capabilities, they had minimized the risk of discovery while maximizing their profits. Crawford's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Queen Isabella. Weber had been spotted in Geneva, attempting to access one of his bank vaults. Swiss authorities had placed the bank under surveillance, but they needed coordination with Interpol to authorize an arrest operation. Commissioner, we have a potential breakthrough, Crawford announced, sharing the information from Queen Isabella. Swiss authorities have located Weber in Geneva. This may be our best opportunity to apprehend him before he disappears completely. Commissioner Rossetti immediately began coordinating with the Swiss Federal Police. Within minutes, they had confirmed that Heinrich Weber was indeed at the Union Bank of Geneva, attempting to access a safety deposit box registered under one of his known aliases. Inspector Crawford, I want you to coordinate with Swiss authorities on Weber's arrest. Given your intimate knowledge of this case, your presence during the operation will be invaluable. The flight to Geneva took just over an hour, giving Crawford time to review Weber's profile and plan the arrest strategy. Heinrich Weber was 63 years old, a distinguished art historian who had built an impressive legitimate career before transitioning into criminal activities. His academic credentials and reputation had provided perfect cover for his theft operations, as his presence in royal collections and museums was not only expected but welcomed. Detective Captain Franz Zimmermann of the Swiss Federal Police met Crawford at Geneva International Airport. Inspector, we have the bank under complete surveillance. Weber has been inside for approximately 45 minutes, which suggests he's accessing multiple safety deposit boxes. The Union Bank of Geneva was located in the heart of the financial district, an imposing modern building that housed some of the world's most valuable private assets. The bank's reputation for discretion and security had made it attractive to Weber as a storage location for evidence of his criminal activities. Captain Zimmermann, what's our plan for the arrest? Crawford asked as they reviewed surveillance footage of Weber entering the bank. We have teams positioned at all exits, and we've coordinated with bank security to monitor Weber's activities inside. We're waiting for him to complete his business and exit the building before making the arrest. This approach minimizes the risk of him destroying evidence or taking hostages. Crawford agreed with the strategy. Weber's arrest needed to be clean and quick, with no opportunity for him to alert other network members or destroy crucial evidence. After another 30 minutes of waiting, Weber emerged from the bank carrying 2 leather briefcases and appeared to be in a hurry. His usually composed demeanor showed signs of stress as he walked quickly toward a waiting taxi. "Move in now," Captain Zimmerman ordered through his radio. Swiss police officers surrounded Weber before he could reach the taxi, making the arrest smoothly and professionally. Weber offered no resistance, but Crawford could see the calculating look in his eyes as he was placed in handcuffs. "Professor Heinrich Weber, you are under arrest for international art theft, conspiracy, and fraud," Captain Zimmerman announced. "You will be held pending extradition proceedings to face charges in multiple jurisdictions." Weber looked directly at Crawford as he was led toward the police vehicle. "Inspector, you have no idea what you've interfered with. The items you're so concerned about recovering have complex ownership histories that go back centuries. What you call theft, others might call recovery of cultural heritage." Crawford found Weber's statement intriguing, but chose not to engage with his justifications at this point. The briefcases Weber had been carrying were secured as evidence and would be examined by forensic experts to determine their contents. The interrogation of Heinrich Weber took place at a secure facility operated by Swiss Federal Police. Crawford observed through a one-way mirror as Captain Zimmerman and an Interpol representative conducted the initial questioning. Weber maintained his composed academic demeanor, answering questions with the precision of someone accustomed to lectures and scholarly debate. "Professor Weber, we have documented evidence of your involvement in art thefts across multiple countries spanning over 20 years. Your cooperation in recovering stolen items could significantly influence the charges you face." Weber leaned back in his chair and considered his response carefully. "Gentlemen, the situation you're investigating is far more complex than a simple criminal enterprise. What you perceive as theft, I see as the correction of historical injustices." "What do you mean by historical injustices?" "Many of the items in royal collections were originally acquired through conquest, colonization, or other forms of appropriation. My network has been working to return these artifacts to their rightful cultural contexts." Crawford found this justification both fascinating and infuriating. Weber was attempting to frame his criminal activities as some form of cultural repatriation, ignoring the fact that he had profited enormously from the sales of stolen items. Captain Zimmerman pressed for more specific information. "Professor, regardless of your motivations, you've committed crimes in multiple countries. We need information about the locations of stolen items and the identities of your associates. I'm prepared to discuss certain aspects of my activities, but only in exchange for guarantees about how the information will be used. Some of the items in question have been sold to collectors who were unaware of their origins and who purchased them in good faith." This statement suggested that Weber might be willing to cooperate, but only under specific conditions that would protect some of his buyers from prosecution. Crawford realized that the complexity of the case would require careful negotiation to balance recovery of stolen items with appropriate criminal justice outcomes. The examination of Weber's briefcases revealed the scope of his record-keeping. The cases contained detailed photographs, provenance documents, and financial records for hundreds of artifacts. Each item was meticulously documented, including its original location, theft date, forgery creation, replacement method, and eventual sale details. Crawford reviewed the files with growing amazement at the sophisticated organization Weber had maintained. The documents revealed thefts from royal collections they hadn't even suspected, including items from private royal apartments that had never been publicly cataloged. "Commissioner Rossetti, we need to expand our investigation again," Crawford reported during a conference call with Interpol headquarters. "Weber's records document thefts from locations we never suspected were compromised. How many additional victims are we talking about, Inspector?" "Potentially dozens." Weber maintained detailed target lists that include private royal collections, noble family estates, and even certain museum pieces that were replaced with forgeries during traveling exhibitions. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If Weber's network had successfully replaced artifacts in museum exhibitions, it meant that forgeries might currently be on display in some of the world's most prestigious cultural institutions. Crawford's phone rang with an urgent call from Queen Isabella. "Inspector, we've had a breakthrough here at the palace. Captain Hayes discovered another hidden chamber that contains original artifacts we thought were stolen." It appears that some items may have been moved for safekeeping rather than stolen. This development added yet another layer of complexity to the investigation. If some items had been legitimately moved for security reasons and not properly documented, it raised questions about the accuracy of their theft reports. Your Majesty, we need to conduct a complete reconciliation of all Treasury records. Weber's documents may help us distinguish between items that were actually stolen and those that were simply misfiled or moved for security reasons. Inspector, there's something else you should know. We've received a communication from King Friedrich of Belgium. His royal treasury has also been compromised, and he's requesting assistance with his own investigation. Crawford realized that Weber's arrest was just the beginning of a much larger international effort to assess and address the damage caused by his network. The cooperation between royal institutions across Europe would be essential to fully understand the scope of the thefts and coordinate recovery efforts. As the day ended, Crawford reviewed the evidence they had gathered and the challenges that lay ahead. Weber's arrest had provided crucial evidence and stopped the active phase of the criminal network, but the work of recovering stolen items and addressing the institutional damage would take years to complete. The investigation had revealed not just the sophisticated nature of international art crime, but also the vulnerabilities in the systems designed to protect cultural heritage. The reforms that would emerge from this case would likely reshape how royal and cultural institutions approach security and documentation. Crawford's final task for the day was coordinating with Queen Isabella on a public statement about the investigation. The arrest of Heinrich Weber and the scope of the criminal network could no longer be kept secret, and they needed to prepare for the international attention that would follow. Inspector, Queen Isabella said during their final conversation of the day, whatever the personal cost to the monarchy, we need to be completely transparent about what we've discovered. The people deserve to know the truth, and other institutions need to be warned about similar vulnerabilities. Crawford admired the Queen's commitment to transparency despite the potential damage to her family's reputation. The revelation of the thefts and the investigation would undoubtedly create controversy, but it would also demonstrate the monarchy's commitment to justice and institutional integrity. The next phase of the investigation would focus on recovery efforts and building cases against remaining network members. However, Crawford recognized that they had already achieved the most important goal, stopping an international criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for over 2 decades. The fight for justice was far from over, but the tide had finally turned in favor of law enforcement and the institutions they served to protect. 6 months after the arrest of Professor Heinrich Weber, Inspector Crawford stood in the Great Hall of Ravenshollow Palace, watching as Queen Isabella personally welcomed delegations from 8 European royal houses. The occasion was unprecedented in modern history, an international conference dedicated to addressing the systematic theft of royal artifacts and implementing new security protocols for cultural heritage protection. The recovery effort had exceeded their most optimistic projections. Using Weber's meticulous records, international law enforcement had successfully traced and recovered over 400 stolen artifacts worth more than 60 million euros. The cooperation between royal institutions, law enforcement agencies, and cultural organizations had created a new model for protecting national treasures. King Friedrich of Belgium approached Crawford with a warm smile. Inspector, I wanted to personally thank you for your work on this investigation. The recovery of our family's ceremonial sword meant more to us than you can imagine. It had been passed down through 12 generations of Belgian monarchs. Crawford felt a deep satisfaction knowing that items with such personal and historical significance had been returned to their rightful owners. The recovery process had revealed not just the monetary value of the stolen pieces, but their immense cultural and emotional importance to the families and institutions that had lost them. Queen Isabella joined the conversation, looking more relaxed than Crawford had seen her in months. Inspector, I've just received word from the Swiss authorities. Heinrich Weber has agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence that will allow him to participate in the ongoing recovery efforts. That's excellent news, Your Majesty. His cooperation has been essential to locating buyers and tracking down missing pieces. The legal resolution of the case had been complex, involving coordination between multiple legal systems and careful negotiation with buyers who had unknowingly purchased stolen items. The approach had prioritized recovery over punishment, recognizing that many of the current holders of stolen artifacts were themselves victims of the deception. Prince Alexander approached the group, carrying a thick folder of documents. "Mother, Inspector Crawford, I have the final report from the Authentication Committee. All items in our treasury have now been verified as authentic originals." The process of authenticating the royal treasures had taken months, involving some of the world's leading experts in historical artifacts and precious stones. The relief of knowing that the most important pieces of the royal collection were genuine had lifted a tremendous weight from Queen Isabella's shoulders. "What about the forgeries that were discovered?" Crawford asked. "They've been retained as evidence for ongoing prosecutions, and they'll eventually be displayed in a special exhibition about art crime and cultural protection," Prince Alexander explained. "The quality of the forgeries was so exceptional that they have educational value in helping people understand the sophistication of modern art crime." Lady Margaret Thornfield approached with an update on the day's proceedings. "Your Majesty, the delegates are ready to begin the formal signing of the International Protocol for Royal Heritage Protection." The protocol represented a landmark achievement in international cooperation on cultural heritage security. The agreement established new standards for documentation, authentication, security systems, and information sharing between royal and cultural institutions. More importantly, it created a permanent international task force dedicated to preventing and investigating art crimes targeting cultural heritage. Crawford reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved since that first morning when he had been summoned to the palace to investigate what appeared to be simple thefts. The case had revealed vulnerabilities in systems that had been trusted for generations, but it had also demonstrated the power of international cooperation in protecting cultural heritage. Detective Sergeant Sarah Mitchell joined Crawford in the Great Hall, carrying her own folder of final case documents. "Inspector, I have the completed prosecution files for the remaining network members." Marcus Blackwood received a 5-year sentence with the possibility of parole in 3 years due to his cooperation. Thomas Pemberton received 7 years, and Dr. Victor Kozlov was sentenced to 4 years in a minimum security facility. What about the government officials who were compromised? That's been more complex. 3 officials have been dismissed from their positions and face criminal charges, but 2 others have been retained in their roles after agreeing to testify about the corruption methods used by Weber's network. Crawford understood the pragmatic approach taken with the corrupt officials. While justice demanded accountability, the information they provided about how criminal networks infiltrated government processes was crucial for preventing future corruption. Commissioner Elena Rossetti from Interpol approached with news about the international impact of the investigation. "Inspector Crawford, I wanted to inform you that the Weber case has become a model for international art crime investigations. We've already applied the techniques developed during this case to 3 other international theft rings, resulting in significant arrests and recoveries. The broader impact of their work was perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the entire investigation. The methods developed for tracking international art crimes and coordinating between different legal systems would continue protecting cultural heritage long after the Weber case was closed." Queen Isabella called for attention from the assembled delegates. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the formal signing ceremony, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of Inspector James Crawford and his team. Their dedication to justice and their respect for our institutions made this recovery possible." The applause that followed was heartfelt and sustained. Crawford felt humbled by the recognition, knowing that the success of the investigation had depended on the cooperation of dozens of law enforcement officials, cultural experts, and institutional leaders across multiple countries. King Christian of Denmark stepped forward to address the assembly. "This investigation has taught us that our individual security is only as strong as our collective vigilance. The protocols we're signing today represent not just protection for our own institutions, but a commitment to safeguarding the cultural heritage of all our nations." The formal signing ceremony was conducted with appropriate dignity and ceremony. Each royal representative signed the protocol using historical pens and seals that had been authenticated to ensure no forgeries would mar this important occasion. The symbolism of using verified authentic instruments to sign an agreement about authenticity was not lost on anyone present. As the ceremony concluded, Crawford found himself in conversation with Captain William Hayes, who had become something of a hero within palace security circles for his role in discovering the hidden chambers and maintaining detailed records that proved crucial to the investigation. "Captain Hayes, what changes are being implemented in the Royal Treasury security systems?" Inspector, we're implementing a comprehensive digital documentation system that will create permanent records of every item, including detailed photographs, measurements, and authentication markers. Additionally, we're establishing quarterly verification protocols that will make it impossible for substitutions to go undetected for extended periods. The security improvements extended far beyond the technical aspects. The investigation had revealed that human factors, particularly the trust placed in outside consultants and experts, had been a key vulnerability exploited by the criminal network. Princess Victoria, Prince Alexander's twin sister, approached Crawford with a thoughtful expression. Inspector, I've been thinking about the broader implications of this case. How do we balance the need for security with the important tradition of sharing our cultural heritage with the public? Crawford was impressed by the princess's sophisticated understanding of the complex issues involved. Your Highness, I think the key is implementing security measures that protect artifacts while still allowing appropriate access for scholarship, exhibition, and public appreciation. That's what I was hoping to hear. We're developing a new program that will allow approved researchers and cultural institutions to access detailed digital records of our collection, reducing the need for physical handling while still supporting legitimate scholarly work. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a courier with an urgent message for Crawford. The message was from the Swiss authorities, informing him that Heinrich Weber's cooperation had led to the discovery of another cache of stolen artifacts in a private vault in Liechtenstein. Your Majesty, Crawford said, showing the message to Queen Isabella. Weber's assistance continues to yield results. This new discovery could lead to the recovery of additional pieces. Inspector, I think it's important that Weber's cooperation be acknowledged appropriately in his final sentencing. While his crimes were serious, his assistance in recovering stolen cultural heritage has been invaluable. Crawford agreed with the Queen's assessment. The balance between punishment and rehabilitation in art crime cases was complex, particularly when the criminals possessed knowledge and skills that could be beneficial to recovery efforts. As the day's events drew to a close, Crawford reflected on the personal and professional growth that had resulted from this investigation. The case had challenged him to think beyond traditional law enforcement methods and embrace international cooperation, cultural sensitivity, and political complexity in ways that had expanded his capabilities as an investigator. Lady Margaret Thornfield approached with a final update on the day's proceedings. Inspector, the delegates have requested that you be acknowledged as an honorary Cultural Heritage Protection Advisor to the International Royal Heritage Foundation. This would involve consulting on security protocols and investigation methods for member institutions. Crawford was honored by the recognition and the opportunity to continue protecting cultural heritage on an international scale. The work that had begun with a simple theft investigation had evolved into a lifelong commitment to safeguarding the cultural treasures that define national and royal identities. Queen Isabella joined the group for final remarks. Inspector Crawford, your work has not only recovered stolen treasures, but has strengthened the bonds between royal institutions across Europe. The cooperation and trust that emerged from this crisis will benefit our institutions for generations to come. As the delegation departed from Ravenshollow Palace, Crawford took a final walk through the royal treasury with Captain Hayes. The chamber that had once revealed such disturbing evidence of systematic theft now stood as a model of security and documentation. Every piece was properly cataloged, authenticated, and protected by state-of-the-art systems. Captain Hayes, what do you think is the most important lesson we've learned from this experience? Inspector, I think we learned that protecting cultural heritage requires more than just physical security. It requires vigilance, cooperation, and, most importantly, a willingness to acknowledge vulnerabilities and address them honestly. Crawford nodded in agreement. The investigation had revealed that even the most prestigious and trusted institutions could be vulnerable to sophisticated criminal enterprises. However, it had also demonstrated that transparency, cooperation, and commitment to justice could overcome even the most complex criminal conspiracies. The final report on the Weber investigation would eventually run to over 3,000 pages, documenting not just the crimes that were committed but the methods developed for investigation, the international cooperation protocols that were established, and the security improvements that were implemented. The report would become required reading for law enforcement officials, museum security professionals, and cultural heritage protection specialists worldwide. As Crawford drove away from Ravenshollow Palace for the final time in his official capacity on this case, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The investigation had begun with a queen's desperate concern about missing treasures and had evolved into an international effort that had protected cultural heritage institutions across Europe. The case had demonstrated that criminal enterprises, no matter how sophisticated or well-connected, could be defeated through determination, international cooperation, and unwavering commitment to justice. Most importantly, it had shown that the cultural treasures that define national identities and royal traditions were worth whatever effort was required to protect them. Heinrich Weber's network had operated for over 20 years, stealing cultural heritage and replacing it with sophisticated forgeries. However, in the end, the truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and the authentic treasures that represented centuries of history and tradition had been recovered and protected for future generations. The story of the crown's secret had concluded, but the work of protecting cultural heritage would continue. The protocols established, the relationships formed, and the methods developed during this investigation would serve as the foundation for future efforts to safeguard the irreplaceable artifacts that connected nations to their past and defined their cultural identities. Inspector Crawford's role in this historic case had ended, but his commitment to justice and cultural heritage protection would continue for the rest of his career. The crown's secrets had been revealed, the criminals had been brought to justice, and the treasures had been restored to their rightful place in the institutions they were meant to represent. The investigation had proven that truth, justice, and international cooperation could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. The royal institutions of Europe stood stronger and more secure, having learned from the crisis and emerged with enhanced protections and renewed commitment to safeguarding their cultural heritage for